Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we're back in War Thunder looking at one of the gift vehicles from the Christmas event. This is Ersatz M10. It is a Panther, which is supposed to be disguised to look like an M10. Now historically, the Panthers that were used were Panther Gs, but in game there is an interesting little tidbit. This seems to be a Panther G chassis with a Panther A turret. And the reason why I say that is, well, first of all, the armor characteristics of the actual stat card itself do match up with the turret and the hull of the two machines. Also, if you look at areas like this, you can see they're the same thickness. And the reason why I say it is an A turret over the Gs is because of this bit here, the mantlet, or part of the mantlet of the Panther A's turret, and also this little bit here. If you look at the Panther A, this is present in here, and also if you look here. If you go to the Panther G, it is only two parts units. There is no center bit, which is present on Ersatz, this little kind of linear thing that you see right here. So that's why I believe it's a Panther G hull with a Panther A turret. There's also some other small things, how the Panther G has two exhausts in the form of these two big things with mufflers on them, and the M10 has two exhausts, whereas the Panther A has a multitude of exhausts at the back of the thing. Also, on the top, they both have this little viewport, but on the Panther D, this viewport does not exist. So yeah, after looking at the Ersatz and comparing it to the other Panthers, I can firmly state that this is a Panther G's hull with a Panther A's turret. So what do you get out of Ersatz M10, and why is it 5.7, you may ask, if it's made out of Panther G and Panther A parts, which are both APCR? Did I just give it away? Panther A and Panther G, which are both 6.0. So Ersatz M10 doesn't get access to APCR. It only has the APC BC round and also the HE round. Obviously, you're going to use the APC BC round. If you look at something like a Panther A, the main reason it's at 6.0 is because it gets access to this, the PZGR 4042. Same with the Panther G. There it is, the 4042 round again. And if we look at the Panther D, which is sat itself at 5.7, it does not get access to the APCR round. So that's pretty much why, even though this thing is made out of components of the G and the A, it isn't at 6.0, it's at 5.7. It's also a rank 3, which is the same as the Panther D that we have. And the main differences between this and the Panther D itself is the fact that it does have some spaced armor on it. So we have 3.5mm on the front and also 7 on the lower glacis. Then we have 3.5 on the front of the turret and some 3.5s on the side of the turret and also in the back. So all of the extra armor that you see is just 3.5mm of structural steel. So that actually does increase the thickness of the armor on of this machine, but the question is, how much does it actually increase it? I mean, it doesn't really increase it that much, but it's still definitely an upgrade over something like a Panther D at the same BR. It still has the same shot trap. It's a little bit harder to hit, which is this area here. Or if you hit this part of the turret, it will diagonally go down and into the top deck, which is 17mm of effective thickness. So you'll be able to go through that quite easily. The booty also has 3.5mm of spaced armor on it, including 40mm, so that can be kind of annoying. It pretty much means that this is safer against stuff like AA and things like that, but against your average gun, you're generally going to be able to penetrate this machine in normally the ways that you would pen an average Panther. One of the key differences, though, is the cupola as well. The commander's cupola, as you can see on the Panther A, is quite tall. It is also present on the Panther G and also the Panther D. On Ersatz, it doesn't exist. The cupola is just non-existent. It's just a hatch, so that actually may make it a little bit more sneaky, and also may make it a little bit harder to kill, because the cupola is one of those areas where if you can get a nice shot into it, it's only 80mm, you can go through it, hit the back, and then it can bounce down and kill the whole turret. And also the commander sits there, so you're always going to kill one crew if you hit the cupola. Well, on the M10, that isn't the case. The commander actually sits behind the gun itself. It does have 5 crew. You have the machine gunner, driver, gunner, loader, and of course the commander sat at the back. It's the 75mm KWK-42 cannon, the same cannon that you get on pretty much all of the Panthers, apart from the Panther 2. And it's very similar to the layout of transmission at the front, engine in the back, 700 horsepower. There's a ton of fuel tanks and radiators all over the place. Something that is kind of interesting, or a little bit of a change, is that the ammunition on the 75mm, you get 82 rounds in this machine. Now, in the Panther A, you get 79. In the Panther G, you get 82. So that would make sense since they have the same hull. But also in the Panther D, you get 79 again. So yeah. Also, the configuration of the ammunition is at least interesting, where it is sat. So a lot of the times I go with just 30 rounds. The reason for this is because it takes away these side skirts of ammunition, so you don't have to deal with that stuff. Also, you don't have smoke grenades for obvious reasons. The areas where the smoke grenades would go have been taken off in favor of some armored plating for the Ersatz M10. So yeah, that's pretty much the differences between the normal Panthers and this. It seems like the engine doesn't really take a hit from the extra weight on it. It really is not a lot of extra weight, so that's probably why. But you still have the same weak spots as the normal Panthers, so the side here is always a weak spot. Under the tracks is a bigger weak spot. Hitting the shot trap here and bouncing down, also just hitting this bit where it's only 100. You can knock out the gun very easily. Just don't really shoot it in like this area here and you should be okay. Obviously you can't hit the cupola either. Just don't shoot at the upper glacis. There's a lot of better areas to hit a Panther than the upper glacis. If we talk about upgrades, because it is a gift vehicle, you don't have to unlock it. It also has premium on it, which is nice. A rank 3 premium is great. Artillery support, of course. Crew replenishment, no significant upgrades that really make that much of a difference if you want to install them. What is kind of interesting is the turret rotation speed, 16.7 degrees per second. The other Panther that we have at this BR, the Panther D, only has 4.2 degrees per second. So a lot of people are going to be running into Ersatz and wondering why the turret is turning so fast. Well, it's because it has the Panther G turning horizontal drive on it instead of the Panther Ds. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. It also has 3,000 rounds of 7.92, which, even though it does have the Panther A turrets, the Panther A only has 2,700, this has 3,000. I don't know why it has 3,000 compared to the others. If we look at the other Panthers, the only one which does is the Panther F, but this is definitely not a Panther F turret. So yeah, it seems to be a bit of a mishmash of all of the other Panthers put together. Which is kind of interesting. 8 degrees of gun depression is definitely serviceable on this vehicle, and also 20 degrees inclination. You don't ever really want to be using that to full effect, because obviously it negates the angle that is on your front armor quite significantly. But what you get is basically a Panther with a little bit of spaced armor on it, which is always good for the gander. We're going to go into some historical stuff and then some gameplay, but before I do that, maybe I should show you the skins, because there is actually 3 of them, which is kind of nice. So we have the standard one, which is pretty much the American brown color that you see on a lot of vehicles. Then we have the winter camouflage, which was the special given away camouflage for getting the bauble, or is it the lights or the bauble stuff from doing the challenges, like the celebrations. I mean, it's a bog standard winter camouflage. Nothing really that interesting for it. Will be very useful on winter maps and stuff like that, but overall it's just a white camo. And then we have Ersatz M10 Panther, which makes it a little bit more realistic. So we actually have the markings that the Ersatz M10 had in the World War II. If you ever see pictures of it, so there are many of them, you can see the markings on the back here. You also have the US roundels on the top and side of the turret, and also on the front of the upper glacis. So I think this is probably the skin that a lot of people are going to be running with. It's a nice skin, but it's not that much different from the standard one, which, you know, basically it's just it missing the decal. So if you want to decal it up on a blank canvas, well, you're able to. It's as simple as that. But anyway, let's get into some historic stuff. So all throughout history, there have been different schemes to pretty much try and get one up over the opponents with elaborate disguises or tricks. Examples of this would be the Trojan horse, or the spying trees that we saw in the First World War. If you've never actually read about the fake spying trees, I would highly recommend it, because it's one of those things which obviously nowadays you could never do. But it's something that is really interesting how they thought of how to do it at the time. But anyway, on to a good old Ersatz M10. So in 1944, in the winter, there was the Battle of the Bulge. It came in, it was the German counteroffensive against the Allied attack. It was pretty much through the Ardennes area, and it was a great success, or at least a success in the grand scheme of things. And as part of a special operation in the Battle of the Bulge, which was codenamed Grief, the Germans employed an even more elaborate deception. And this involved taking a bunch of Panthers and disguising them as N10 Wolverine tank destroyers. And the Captain George Manwaring, the fictional one, he said this is just the sort of shabby tricks the Nazis would play. And yes, that was incredibly shabby and incredibly, I suppose a lot of people would deem it as a war crimey, but the idea was there to try and get a one-up on the opponent. This was actually coined from Adolf Hitler himself, and he commanded the Waffen-SS Commando Otto Skorzeny in Operation Grief, and it was part of an elaborate special operation during the Battle of the Bulge in 1944. And Skorzeny had become one of Hitler's most trusted operatives at the time, after he succeeded in the rescue of Benito Mussolini in 1943. Skorzeny was ordered by Hitler to form the Panzer Brigade 150, and their role would be to capture as many bridges over the Meuse River as possible. Obviously, bridges were incredibly important in World War II, because the bigger bridges you would actually be able to get tanks and stuff like that across big, large rivers. So therefore, that's why there was a big campaigns either to destroy the bridges or build bridges, or just try and capture them from each side of the enemy. It was one of the big reasons why in Normandy the airborne divisions, the paratrooper divisions, yes, they were designed to take towns and villages and key points such as Villa Bocage and places like that, but also there was bridges such as the Pegasus Bridge, which was needed in order to get tanks across rivers to get them into the mainland of Normandy. The same was true in pretty much every other part of the World War, including the Battle of the Bulge. So the twist to the operation itself was that the troops in the brigade would be disguised as British and American troops, and they would also use the enemy's equipment, vehicles, and tanks. And the hope was that this would lead to crazy confusion, and that the American and British forces wouldn't know who to fight. The SS Commando himself, though, Skorzeny, was pretty much concerned, and even with his men in disguise, they were in breach of the Hague Convention of 1907, Part 4, Section 2, Chapter 2, and this basically meant that if any of his troops were to be captured in the uniforms of British or American soldiers, they could just be straight up shot as spies. So it was a great risk that Skorzeny was taking with his troops. So with the Ardennes offensive looming on the horizon, Scorzini only had a matter of weeks to assemble his brigade. He was able to get together 3,300 troops, and this would fill 3 battalions worth of troops. And also part of the request was that the troops have general knowledge of the English language and American dialects, which I think is pretty fair if you're trying to pass yourself off as British and American troops. The Western German Army Command, the OB West, was charged with finding the needed US and British equipment. This included 15 tanks, 20 self-propelled guns, 20 armored cars, 100 jeeps, 40 motorcycles, and 120 trucks. They also were tasked with collecting as many British and American uniforms as possible. And then when all of the equipment itself was gathered, this would be sent to the brigade's training ground, which was set up in eastern Bavaria at Grafenwohr. What was actually delivered, though, as usual in World War II, what is requested and what is delivered is kind of completely different. So what was actually delivered was massively short of what Scorzini wanted, and of the 3,300 men which were actually requested, only about 400 of them spoke any kind of English, and the best English speakers, about 150 of them, were formed into a commando unit known as Einheit Stillau. To fill the gaps in the infantry itself, Scorzini recruited from other corps such as the SS Jagdverband, I hope I said that right, and the SS Fallschirmjäger. The paratroopers and tank crews from other panzer regiments and brigades as well were taken from. This still did not meet the desired 3,300 men. He was really struggling for that number. 2,500 would be all Scorzini had to deploy, unfortunately. The brigade was scaled back to 2 battalions to cope with the smaller than anticipated number of infantry. The infantry, though, were not the only disappointment in the amount of numbers he had. Far fewer captured Allied vehicles were actually available than anticipated. He was able to get himself 49 unarmored vehicles, and that was pretty much it. The shortfall was met with German army vehicles repainted in the American olive drab, and also on top of that was that of the 15 requested captured Allied tanks or boot panzers, only 2 American M4 Shermans in an ill state of repair were delivered. So yeah, they were pretty much useless at that point. Also, to cover the gap left by the decrepit M4s, Scorzini employed 5 of the Germans' own tanks, the Panzer V Panther, but to blend them in with the operation, modifications had to be made. So, the 45-ton Cuckoo was what was given the name of this machine. It was defined as a medium tank, which of course we're talking about here is the Panther. It entered service in 1943 in response to the T-34. It had armor up to 80mm and on the upper glacis, which was at 35 degrees, and it was of course powered by the Maybach HL230 P30 V12 with 690 horsepower. Pretty quick and nippy tank, but also quite heavy, surprisingly called a medium tank. But then again, when you have Tigers rolling around, I suppose it makes a lot of sense. So the actual Panthers chosen for Operation Grief were Ausführung Gs. The Aus G was produced in March 1944, and it was the last model of the Panther to be produced in large numbers, and featured a number of changes over the previous models that were originally intended for introduction on the cancelled Panther II. So this included thicker side armor, the addition of a wedge on the bottom of the mantlet to eliminate the shot trap, and the deletion of the driver's vision port in exchange for a rotating periscope above this position. Modifications to the actual Panthers to make them look like the M10 tanks. The description of the changes is based on information from the issue 57 of the US War Department publication Tactical and Technical Trends, published in April 1945. Obviously this is wartime intelligence, maybe it's not as you know, accurate as you may want, but it's really the only thing we have. So the turret itself saw the heaviest application of this so-called camouflage, if you want to call it that, to replicate the M10's unique turret shape. 5 sections of sheet metal around 3.4mm thick were cut, and 2 pieces were cut to mirror the turret's sides. These were flanked and bent into shape, supported by iron bars. 2 more pieces were placed on the rear of the turret to represent the lower bustle and counterweight, and were strengthened with iron bars also. This counterweight piece is mysterious, as there appears to be no visual record of it. So yeah, that's a bit of a shame. These 4 pieces were then attached together, and the framework welded to the turret. Even the smallest M10 turret details were closely studied and replicated, including the lifting eyes and brackets and the attachment points for the applique armor. A false gun shield was also manufactured and welded to the Panther's own. A hole was made for the coaxial machine gun, something the original M10 did not require, as it didn't have one. The most drastic change to the turrets came with the removal of the iconic German commander's cupola, and having been cut out, it was replaced by a simple 2-piece hatch, and each piece was hinged for opening. No vision devices were added, so the commander was now effectively blind when buttoned down, which obviously isn't that useful. I'm not going to go into all of the other parts of the differences between the Panther itself and also the M10, so I will leave a link in the description which sends you to an article where you can read this all. I'm going to move on to the action section, just because I'm feeling quite ill. So in action, the disguised Panthers used a number of methods to signify the surrounding German forces that it was indeed them and not an allied vehicle. This included painting a subtle yellow triangle on the rear of the tank. Another method was that all the disguised tanks would have their guns aligned in certain directions. Before the operation started, rumors began to spread among the troops about the brigade's purpose, and the troop believed they would be reinforcing besieged towns such as Dunkirk, Lorient, and another was that they were to capture Antwerp. The most elaborate speculation was that their orders were to capture the Allied Supreme Command at the Supreme Headquarters Allied Forces Europe in Paris. Not even Scorzini's own commanders knew about the true plan, and just 4 days before the beginning of the operation on the 10th of December would they know. So everybody was kept in the dark for a long time, very much the same with D-Day. Obviously, if you have a spy amongst your mix, you generally don't want them knowing, so the enemy will find out, you know, very soon. On the 14th of December, the 150th Brigade was assembled near the historic town of Bad Münstereifel. I hope I said that right. And they were supposed to move out on the 16th. The aim itself was to capture 2 or more bridges over the River Meuse at Amay, Huay, and Andon. The brigade was supported by 3 Panzer divisions: 1st SS Panzer Division, 12th SS Panzer Division, and the 12th Volksgrenadier Division. The bridges were divided between the 3 battle groups that would each hold a bridge until they could be destroyed, which would prevent the Allies from crossing. It was hoped that the confusion caused by the Allies receiving fire from what appeared to be friendly vehicles and troops would play into the hands of the Wehrmacht, and in turn increasing the likelihood of success. Well, that's all great in practice, but unfortunately, the brigade became delayed by 2 days after the 1st SS Panzer Division failed to link up at the starting point. And then, with this 48-hour delay, Scorzini realized that the original plan was now doomed. As a result of this failure, Scorzini attended a meeting at the 6th Panzer Army's headquarters where he suggested that his brigade take on the role of a normal army panzer unit, and this was actually approved, and the commander was ordered to assemble his forces south of the Belgian municipality of Malmedy. Under Scorzini's command, the brigade moved out on the 21st of December 1944 in an attempt to take Malmedy. The 150th tried several times to take the town, but they were repelled by the defending American forces, including the 120th Infantry Division, and every time The reason why they couldn't push forward was because of heavy artillery support. Private Francis Curry of the 120th received the Congressional Medal of Honor after he managed to knock one of the tanks out with a bazooka. The artillery pummeled the 150th into submission, taking a heavy toll on the brigade. Even Scorzini himself was wounded by shrapnel. Scorzini's units would be the only German attempt to take Malmedy during the Battle of the Bulge. And then Operation Grief succeeded in causing a great deal of confusion in the American and Allied forces, so it did kind of do its job. Spies were thought to be everywhere. It was even thought at one point that there may be an attempt to kidnap General Eisenhower. This paranoia spawned from a German commando team which was captured on the 17th of December, where one of the commandos told their captors that there was a plan to capture the general. A number of friendly fire incidents also occurred after this as a result of the confusion. On the 20th of December, 2 American GIs were shot at a checkpoint by a military policeman in a case of mistaken identity. Such incidents continued to happen into early 1945, when 2 more were killed and several injured when the US 6th Armored Division engaged the 35th Infantry the Infantry Division by mistake near Bastogne. So yeah, it seems like there were some confusions which were actually, created by this brigade, but the thing is, they were small and minor and generally could be put down to, I would say, human error instead of this brigade being successful. Like 2 GIs being shot at a checkpoint by military policemen, I'm sure we could put that down to many other factors than this, and also the other stuff like heightened security around General Eisenhower. Yeah, I can definitely see that being put out there, but I think human error may be a bit more to play when it comes to this stuff. Instead of seeing Operation Grief as a success, I think it's much better just to say Operation Grief. The 150th, which was supposed to carry out everything, was absolutely annihilated. All of the tanks and the equipment was also annihilated. I would actually class it more as a failure myself. But it is an interesting idea, and that's pretty much where the idea came from. So let's get into some gameplay. When the Panthers were introduced into War Thunder, one of the things that they were very good at was having a capable gun and decent speed behind them, and also interesting characteristics such as a very strong upper glacis, and also a turret which you could shot trap, but it was quite hard to penetrate with a lot of guns that you fought. This meant at 5.7 you had a pretty formidable lineup. You had the Tiger H1, the Panther D, the Ostwind. You could throw in a Panzer 470 if you felt like it. There was a lot of options. Fast forward to present day, you also still have a lot of options at 5.7. You now have Ersatz M10, you have the Waffenträger 5.7, you also have some other stuff like the Tiger E that you can throw in, which is also 5.7. But the main thing that has changed is the fact that we now have Britain, we now have America, we now have Japan and French tanks. And one of the things that came along, at least in the past year or so, was stabilizers equipped with British tanks which have incredibly good reloads. So examples of this are stuff like the Carnarvon, the Centurion Mark III. The Centurion Mark I, I believe, doesn't have a stabilizer, but it does have a very fast-firing gun and a very good turret on it. The Americans get access to the 76 Shermans, but that's not the stuff you got to watch out for. You got to watch out for the T-25 with its 90mm. So as you can see, when the Panthers were first introduced, they had a wonderful time of it, facing stuff like T-3485s, and it was a pretty good matchup. But as time went on, more and more stuff was added to the 5-second bracket, and made using a Panther a hell of a lot worse. Now, some people still enjoy using the Panther. I personally don't, and it's not because of the vehicle itself, it's because of the battle rating that it is at. A lot of the time I get up to it. No idea why, don't know whether it's because I play weird BRs that nobody else plays, or if it's to do with something else. So at 5.7, the majority of the matches that I get into will be 6-7 matches. and because I have to play 5.7 in order to either spade out the Tigers or the Panther Ds or to show off the Ersatz M10, what I end up doing is getting myself into a bunch of 6.7 matches where the Panther really gets outshined, and the reason for this is once again of what's been added to the game. So the Tiger 2H used to be king, and then the RU-251 came along, so that was good for the Germans. Then the Americans got the T-29, the T-34, the British, of course, the Carnarvon, and the Sense Mark III, and all of those goodies. And the Russians, well, around 6.7, they didn't really get that much. I mean, they have the Su-100P, and the T-44 is 6.3, the Su-85, so at least in the sense for the Russians, unless you're running the Type 62, it's not too bad. But the main thing is the Americans and the British that came along and started smacking about Panthers, which were just completely in the wrong BR. So my thoughts may be tapered by the fact that I get up to it a lot in Ersatz M10. But let's compare it to the actual Panther D in the tree. So the Panther D in the tree is exactly the same as Ersatz M10, apart from Ersatz M10 has the extra little bit of armor on it. So if you want to class it as spaced armor, that's what we can call it. The engine performance is pretty much exactly the same. The armor itself, the turret is pretty much the same as the Panther A's, which is very similar to the Panther D's. The only real difference between Ersatz and the Panther D's turrets is the fact that it might be easier to shot trap on Ersatz because there's much more defined angles, so hitting the bottom of the turret and getting it to bounce down in the hole might be easier to do. But overall, in my opinion, it's just a direct upgrade over the Panther D. Now, since it's a gift vehicle, I don't like the idea of having a direct upgrade of a vehicle straight over the counterpart that's in the tree. I would rather it be the opposite way round, where the gift vehicle was slightly worse than what was actually in the tree. And I understand a lot of people think that, you know, they worked really hard for the vehicle, therefore they should get something good out of it. But I'm not one of those people, because it ends up with the most experienced players in the game having the best vehicles, and then the people who are climbing through the ranks run into a bunch of vehicles which are just better than them, even if they're using the same nation and the same type of vehicle. And then it just becomes a bit of a cluster where the people who are trying to grind through the game and maybe aren't as experienced get a horrible gaming experience and get twatted by the people with these fancy machines that they've never seen before. So yeah, I would personally put the Panther, the M10 Panther, up to 6.0. But the only reason for this is because of the extra spaced armor. I am completely fine with it being at 5.7 because it doesn't get access to APCR, but because it has a Panther G turret, I would put it up to 6.0 and I would give it APCR. I think the Panther G's turret is better than what we get on Ersatz M10, and therefore the comparison can be made. And then, well, you can talk about the Panther A. Should that be put down? Should that be left where it is because it's got APCR? I think it should be left where it is because it has APCR. But yeah, Ersatz would not be a direct upgrade over something like a Panther G, but it is a direct upgrade over the Panther D, so therefore I would bump it up a bit. The Panther has the similar issues that it has always had. The fact that the Panther itself struggles with reversing, the fact that its reload was good enough back in the day, but then the British came along and autoloaders from the French came along, and you realize that, well, you can't reload as fast as them. Also, a big difference between the Panther D and Ersatz is the turret rotation speed, something I didn't talk about before. Turret rotation speed has always been an issue on the German tanks, and this was exemplified by the Panther D, which I believe has about a 4 degrees per second of gun or turret rotation. Now, this was improved on the Panther A and G, and Ersatz M10 does have the same turret rotation as the Panther G and Panther A models, so that actually makes a large difference over the Panther D. It may not be a large thing, or you may not think it is, but it definitely is, especially if you're getting flanked, which was a big issue with the Panthers back in the day, because you could just flank it and you knew that the turrets couldn't turn fast enough. But yeah, reversing is an issue. Going forward is completely fine in the Panther. The gun, if you don't get up tiered, is fine. It's really good against 5.7 vehicles or 6.0 vehicles. What it ain't good at is killing anything that is 6.7. And if you keep getting up tiered, like I've been, then there's not a lot you can do. You just pretty much get left by the wayside by the larger vehicles, and you've got to hope that your team can pull you through, while you maybe end up with like 1 or 2 kills on the side, and hopefully you don't get overrun by those British tanks, which are always going to come at you. And now, instead of just British tanks, it's all the French damn tanks coming at you. In conclusion, the Panther is a tank of a bygone era in War Thunder, very similar to how I described the T-44 when talking about it. The same logic can be applied. It is a tank that used to be good, and now that other vehicles have been added to the game, they just completely outshine it. And Ersatz is another example of this. It is an interesting gift vehicle. I think it should be a gift vehicle. It is nice to get it from a historical point of view, but this ain't gonna change, you know, it ain't gonna suddenly come out and everybody's gonna use it. It's gonna be a vehicle that people play for 10 matches, or if they're grinding something new in rank 3 or 4 of Germany, but apart from that, it's never gonna be seen. Because the Panthers just aren't good enough. They just aren't. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.